Numerous TEA members have shared inconsistencies in their TVAAS data, and we are seeing that TVAAS scores are not necessarily stable from one year to the next for a given teacher. The new licensure proposal presents several issues for TEA members, and these include dual standards for teachers with or without individual TVAAS scores, and the removal of any requirements for professional development, professional growth, and additional coursework. We also have a lot of questions about educators who work in non-classroom settings and administrators. What will the license requirements for them look like to maintain their licensure? But above all, our opposition to this policy change centers around the use of TVAAS data. While TEA supports the use of student outcomes as one component among multiple measures of teacher performance, in teacher evaluations, it may be appropriate, but tying license renewal directly to TVAAS scores is not appropriate, and we challenge the idea that a teacher's score in a given year is a valid indicator of the teacher's future performance. In the Department of Education's presentation to the State Board, their study of teachers who would have lost their license under the new plan reveals that 43% of those teachers had higher scores the following year. In fact, 20% of those teachers had TVAAS scores of 3, 4, or 5 in the year that they would have lost their job due to lack of a teaching license. These are among the reasons that we cannot support this proposed change to teacher licensure. And at this time, I'd like to introduce TEA General Counsel, Mr. Rick Colbert, to share some additional information.
Thank you, Ms. Summerford. The Commissioner's proposal it has been the subject of a considerable amount of study on our part over the last couple of weeks. And just to summarize it briefly, what the Commissioner proposes is to use a snapshot of teachers' TVAAS scores for the last 3 consecutive years. And even if the teacher's overall evaluation results are good, if the snapshot shows a certain level of TVAAS scores, the teacher would lose her license. It would be the end of her teaching career. The justification for this proposal is actually in a slideshow or PowerPoint presentation that the Commissioner has provided to the State Board of Education. And he says in that PowerPoint, and I've got a copy of the chart where he says it, he says that TVAAS is a strong predictor of future performance. He says that research shows that teachers often make significant improvement in their first few years in the profession, but after those early years, teacher impact on student growth remains relatively stable. On the contrary, we believe that TVAAS results lack the predictive certainty that the Commissioner attributes to them, and to use them as the tipping point for ending a teacher's career is wrong. We all know that there are many factors besides just the teacher that influence student achievement in school, but we don't really have a way to separate all those factors so that we can measure each one of them. So what TVAAS does, and I'm not standing here to quarrel with TVAAS for what it is, but what TVAAS does is it takes years of TCAP test results and using a statistical formula, it attempts to estimate what a norm of student growth would be. And then the difference between that estimated norm and the growth of the teacher's own cohort of students winds up being that teacher's value-added estimate. And estimate's an important word here. So they take that estimate, they divide it by something called a standard error, which is a part of the statistical analysis, and they come up with an index, and based on that index, they give a teacher a level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, or level 5 as her TVAAS score. 1 and 2 are below expectations, level 3 is normal or average or typical, and level 4 and level 5 are above expectations. Now, we have known for a long time something that seems to be disregarded in this proposal, and that is that TVAAS scores are really just estimates. Back in the early days of TVAAS, the Value Added Research and Assessment Center at the University of Tennessee, where TVAAS originated, published a primer for teachers and principals. And in that primer, they explain that TVAAS is just an estimate of the truth. And to quote the primer, the real thing exists in theory only. We can illustrate this with a real life example from a teacher who has agreed to allow us to make public her TVAAS results so that we can show you just how volatile this TVAAS can be. Cynthia Watson is a Tennessee teacher. She teaches in Weakley County. She teaches 7th grade science, teaches the same class year after year after year. She's regarded by her principals and her central office administrators and her peers as a good teacher. She's a veteran teacher. She's been teaching since 1996. So, according to the commissioner, her impact on student growth should remain relatively stable. She is one of those teachers whose stable results don't actually come out that way on her TVAAS reports, though. If you look at the chart to my right, if you can see it, what we have done in your packet, I think you may have the actual reports, but we have summarized her 2008 to 2012 TVAAS results. This is to my right and your left. And as you can see, in 2008, she was a level 5 teacher, the best of the best in Tennessee. In 2009, she dropped all the way to level 1, purportedly the worst of the worst. In 2010, she was back up to level 4. In 2011, level 5, and in 2012, all the way back down to level 1 again. Hardly the sort of stability that the commissioner suggests TVAAS results would yield. An added problem to this volatility in these results is the fact that even the estimates you see can't be relied on from one year to the next, because the estimates get recalculated each year based on a 5-year rolling set of data. So if you look at the chart to your right and my left, at the top of that chart, you will see what I'm talking about. In 2010, Cynthia Watson's TVAAS estimate was a 1.3. And we've put the standard error there too, and I'll explain that in a minute. But her result in 2010 was a 1.3 estimate. That made her a level 4 teacher. In 2011, not only did she get her 2011 result, but her 2010 result got recalculated based on additional data from 2011 and whatever predictive value that may have, and dropping off some of the data that was used when her 2010 estimate was originally made. The result was a half-point drop, retroactively, if you will, to her 2010 estimate. So if you look at her 2011 TVAAS report, instead of the level 4 she saw in 2010, she sees a level 3 for 2010 when she gets her 2011 report. That's actually what brought Ms. Watson to TEA, because she was trying to find out why her 2010 score was changing retroactively. And it changed again retroactively in 2012. It was a full point below what it had originally been in 2010. by the time she got to 2012. Now, if a score can go down a point, there's no reason to think it can't go up a point for a teacher who may have lost her license a year or 2 years before, based on the commissioner's proposal. We took Ms. Watson's information and contacted SAS Institute in North Carolina, the people that run this data through their computer system to produce these reports. And what they told us was that these estimates are indeed that. They're just estimates. They get recalculated each year. There's nothing out of the ordinary in what happened to Ms. Watson. It's the way the system works. We contacted the Tennessee Department of Education and spoke to the individual there, Mr. Zach Rossley, who's their chief expert on TVAAS. We met with Mr. Rossley. He told us, these are estimates, this is the way it works. The key from those two contacts that we had was no one at SAS and no one at the Department of Education suggested that this was an anomaly, that there was anything unusual or out of the ordinary or wrong with what had happened to Ms. Watson. This is simply the way it works. Now, from the standpoint of predictability associated with these scores, there is one other factor to remember, and I want to say we have today in our audience Dale Ballou. He's a professor at Vanderbilt. He's very familiar with TVAAS. He's worked with it, and he's not a proponent or opponent of any position regarding this issue, but we have sought out his assistance on the technical aspects of things, and so I'm sure he's going to correct me if I'm misspeaking about any of this, but at any rate, because these are statistical estimates that we're talking about, the statisticians, like Dr. Ballou that produced them, also have to account for the chance that they may be wrong. And so in each of these TVAAS reports, there appears something called a standard error next to each score. The TVAAS reports don't really explain what use to make of the standard error, but if you look at the chart to your right, you'll see there's a plus or minus figure by each estimate. And I'll give you the first one, for example, in 2010, the estimate was a 1.3, and the standard error that was shown on the report was a 1.3. Now, if you go back and look at the primer that the University of Tennessee put out for teachers and principals, what they said about standard error, which is not addressed anywhere in the commissioner's proposal to the state board, is that it's very easy to overreact to differences among reported gains and percentages if you don't take standard error into account. And what the primer says is that the way to take standard error into account is add it to and subtract it from the estimate, and you create a confidence band, or what statisticians call a confidence interval. And you can have some degree of confidence that the truth lies somewhere within that interval. Interestingly enough, the commissioner, in his PowerPoint to the Board of Education in support of this change in the licensure standards, he has this chart that he pulls from a study that was done by the Harvard Center for Education Policy Research back in 2011. It's not actually a TVAAS study, it's a study based on some value-added methodology in the Fulton County schools in Atlanta, Georgia. But what he did with this chart is he left off the confidence interval. If you pull up that chart on the internet, you'll see that there's a 90% confidence interval associated with this line he's drawn on there. So there's a line there, well, there's a series of dots there on their chart, but then there's a confidence interval, that spans a good bit of space on either side of it. So it's not the absolute predictor that the commissioner would have the State Board of Education believe. There are 3 points we believe to be taken away from this. TVAAS results are indeed estimates. They're not precise mathematical figures. The estimates change, and they change retroactively from one year to the next, so that they can actually, you could have a teacher whose estimate in one year causes her to lose her license, and the next year it goes up so that she shouldn't have lost her license. And proper consideration to TVAAS estimates must take into account confidence intervals based on the standard error, something that hasn't been considered in the commissioner's proposal. TVAAS may have valid uses as an information source as we look for ways to improve public education in Tennessee. We're not suggesting that it has no use or utility at all. But when you set out to fix something, you have to choose the right tool for what you're trying to fix. I have a shovel in my garage, but my shovel won't do me much good if I'm trying to fix a light switch or a leaky faucet. TVAAS is not the right tool to use to make these make or break decisions on teacher licensure.
Thank you. As Rick suggested, there's much more information in the packets that have been provided to the media, and it's clear to us that this TA member from Weakley County is a teacher for whom TVAAS is not a predictable measure from year to year. In fact, if she were to receive a TVAAS score of 1 again in 2013, she would lose her teaching license under this plan. The very credential that qualifies her as a professional in her field. And with that loss, she loses her ability to continue the work she loves and the work she's been doing in Weakley County for 16 years. Are Ms. Watson's scores an anomaly? Nothing in the communications, as Rick pointed out, nothing in the communications that she had with her school district, with the Department of Education, or with SAS indicates that that's the case. We cannot stand by while effective teachers like Ms. Watson are at risk of being removed from our public schools, removed from their profession, based on a single questionable measure of teacher performance. I thank you for joining us today. Mr. Colbert and I will be available for further questions, as will Dr. Ballou from Vanderbilt. Thank you.